Hello, everybody. We are live, and I am so excited for this and to announce that we have the one and only Andrew D. Meredith. And I always point the wrong way, so I was trying to hedge my bets and do both hands. But Andrew D. Meredith, author of such novels such as Thrice, I don't have a copy yet, Deathless Beast, and Bone Shroud. There you go. He's got his Thrice copy. I need to get a copy, but I read that one previously, and then I got
Right. Yeah.
uh, yeah, I am so excited to have you here. And so we can probably start with you just kind of introducing yourself, and then we'll do some chatting. We are going to be I'll just put the banner up now. We're going to be completely spoiler free for a while. We'll probably get into some spoilers a bit later, but so no worries if you haven't read anything. We're going to do a lot of general stuff first. But Mr. Andrew D. Meredith, if you would like to introduce yourself.
I am Andrew D. Meredith, and I am the author of, as Nico said, Thrice, and the first two books so far in the Collation saga, Deathless Beast and Bone Shroud. I'm from Spokane, Washington originally, and I'm now living in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And it's a beautiful sunny day outside on this Groundhog's Day. And I was raised by two geeks who had a really large library of fantasy books in the basement, and I devoured a lot of them. Probably didn't read as many as I should have, and I'm still suffering for that. But now I'm a writer, and currently, at least for right now, a full-time writer and audiobook narrator until that changes. And I have a lot of things coming out this year. Hopefully, I'm shooting for 3 books this year, and I had 3 books last year, and I'm going to keep going as long as I can keep pulling it off. Why would I stop?
Yeah, I'm so excited for all the stuff coming out, and we'll talk about audio definitely a bit later as well too.
Mm-hmm.
But if you need an audiobook narrator, seriously check out
Yes.
my friend here, Mr. Andrew D. Meredith, because he does a fantastic job narrating his own books, and it's really great. He's great at doing character voices, narration, everything, and so we'll definitely talk about that more. But definitely check out his stuff if you need an audiobook narrator.
And you can always ping me for like demo reels and stuff, and I'm happy to send you stuff.
Hey, there we go. Andrew asked if you're feeling better, and then said you shouldn't eat books because it can cause a blockage. He says
it's good roughage.
It's the fastest way to consume the material, right?
The leaf, yeah.
As long as you don't have a needle with the leaf.
That's right.
Probably be okay. I'm gonna try and keep this well moderated, but I have a feeling there's gonna probably be a lot of asides. We were just joking. It's whenever I've chatted with you, we always just will go into all kinds of crazy topics and everything. I do have my all kinds of questions and stuff, but and then we were talking so much, almost missed the start time of the stream because we were just chatting about stuff, and so it'll be a lot of fun, but. There were so many things I'm just really excited to chat with you on, and I just want to say with the books that I've read, it's so quickly you become one of my absolute favorite authors, and I'm so excited to just continue reading your stuff. And it's for me especially, and Thrice was my first look, and I really enjoyed it, and it was so different and so good. And then I just absolutely fell in love with the Collation saga because I've learned how to pronounce that recently correctly. So we'll see if I slip up and say it wrong again. But yeah, the Collation saga is just it's not really what you get anymore. There's not a lot of stuff being written today that's like this, and a lot of the older stuff isn't necessarily like it either. And I have to say that it's just the same thing, but it's just like it's fits my taste so incredibly well. So
fits mine too.
Yeah, see, and that's too. I found out for those of you watching, I found out that he's really great at recommending books for me too, because I'm like, here are all the things I love about your books. He's like, oh, here, check out these things too. And so it's been it works so well, and I know we talked about too, where you got to kind of write what you want to read, and thankfully, what you want to read and write is also what I want to read. So it's worked. It's worked really well for me so far. But so kind of talking about and just the books in general, and I'll probably go a little bit out of order, but I feel like with
Yeah.
the kind of the introduction, just talking about your writing style in general, because there's some definite things that it feels like you do pretty differently. And one of them for me is the very focus on storytelling. And it's not to say that we're not looking at characters or setting or world building, and you write characters really well. And I also love the way you world build through the storytelling. But how did you develop that storytelling
Yeah.
approach? Um,
So I think the way that I've developed my writing is the way that I develop a lot of my skills, and that's by watching other people's mistakes and then choosing specifically not to do that. So I was a very late driver. My parents said, you know what? As long as you don't get a driver's license, we'll keep pedaling you around. We'll buy you a bus pass so you don't have to drive and save you money. I'm like, great. So I didn't get my driver's license till I was 20. And because of that, I was a pretty safe driver out the gate because I had a longer, early adult stage where I could actually absorb bad writing, bad driving habits, and say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do this. And I'm very intentional. So I think the same thing happened with writing. I think my desire to have stories specific when I specifically go into a storyteller telling the story in my books is actually because of one of my big griefs with the Bulgariad. And that was that Wolf tells one story, the entire series. He's this big storyteller, and they have the prologues, blah, 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 so-and-so. Whether you like Bulgariad or not, Wolf has that trope at the beginning of he's a storyteller. And he sits down and he tells, I don't remember what story it is. Maybe it's Vomimbre or something, but he tells a story. And then he never tells another story the whole rest of the series. And I was like, there should be a story per book. This is stupid. And so I did it. I said, I'm going to make sure that every single book has a story in it, at least one, if not two, because I want that immersion of what the story offers. Sometimes it doesn't offer. Sometimes it has nothing to do with the story of the actual full story. Like the Vodyanov story is just a way to explain why the Vodyanov exists from a mortal's point of view. But there's other stories that I put in there very specifically. You just got to figure it out whether the story is meant to have a moral to the greater story, or if it's meant to have a moral to the chapter that you're currently in. So
there's definitely one specific story, and I think it was Deathless Beast, that I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is going to be relevant. And I'm like, I'm watching you because of this story and the way it was told. It seemed a little suspicious. So
the story that Nair tells at the beginning with the or the story of Coin.
It was now you're gonna make me remember. It was the story specifically about like going and like the traveling god who asked for things to be made.
Yes. Yep. He goes to each place, and in the end, he just discovers that it's just old age. Yeah. I love that one.
As I say, I'm watching you on that one for sure.
If people want to hear me read it, it is up on my YouTube channel as I put the audio over me mouthing in a campfire, so you can listen to it, and it won't spoil any part of the book for you.
And you said with a campfire, even?
It's pretty bad. It was just me like mouthing watermelon over a campfire with me wearing a cloaked hood, and then the audio of the audiobook over it, so you can hear the whole story. So you can even just close the window and let them listen to it.
I feel like that's the absolute perfect aesthetic for that, though. Seriously, exactly. I didn't realize that was. I'm immediately going to look that up after this, because that sounds fantastic. So I'm really excited to see that. But that's such a perfect way to do like an audio snippet of a campfire story like that. So
my wife keeps telling me once I have a whole bunch of those little stories, I'm going to probably compile them into like a fairy tale story. Kind of like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell had the extra, the Great Ladies of Grace Adieu, and it was a bunch of short stories that take place in the Jonathan Strange world, probably sub notes and that didn't get into the book, and so she put them into a hardback. It's pretty cool.
That's a cool idea, for sure. And so we talked about the storytelling, which that was an interesting an analogy with talking about driving and kind of looking at that. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It's just how to, learn and see things you like, things you don't like, and try to just do the things you like and not what you don't. But I know I've seen you mention in some other interviews that you are a really big outliner and that you outline your points and you don't specifically fill in or like write any of the like the dialogue or the scenes necessarily, but you have it very specific and then you just kind of fill in between those points.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you a little bit about that, but also specifically with the world building, because I've noticed you do so much world building kind of almost passively, so that we're not getting any sort of info dump. We're just, as we're traveling along or as people are talking, we get a lot of world building elements. How much of that is intentional? How much of that is just kind of natural, or how does that really fit in?
So I learned after my first book I wrote, since 2017. I don't count anything that happened before 2017 because that was my grub years before I went into my cocoon. But after 2017, the first book I wrote, which was the first two books of the Collation Saga as a single book, and I learned that in my outlining I couldn't plan my conversations. Like I had in this chapter, Butler is going to talk to maid and explain blah 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 blah, and they need to argue about this thing, and so it never worked. Because usually what would happen is I get to that chapter and that conversation had already just naturally happened much earlier on a walk on the road, and I'm like, what am I going to do with this chapter now? I can't just cut it because the next event doesn't happen until the next day, blah blah blah. And so I started learning to no longer plan any of my conversations out. I just plan who's going to be there, what needs to happen, and then let the conversations occur from there. And then the world building and the character building comes out of that, because then having those specific characters there for that reason is a very different conversation. It's like Lord of the Rings, between the books and the movies. If you compare when Gandalf talks about, there's several things he says to Pippin in Minas Tirith in the movies that he says to Bilbo in the Shire. And I'm listening to the Lord of the Rings right now with Andy Serkis reading it, and he does a really good job at emulating like all the actors from the movies. It's pretty awesome, but the tone is totally different because he's not saying it looking at Minas Morgul about to come launch their assault against Minas Tirith, and there's that heavy dread that's happening. He's talking in the Shire where it's all hopeful and cheerful, and it changes the whole context. And so context is important, and characters that are in the scene that are important too. A conversation between CERN with any other character is going to have a lot of different weights attached to it that it would if it was Imbris that was giving the information, right? Even that would be questionable. But yeah, so who's there, and when and there's times where you're just like, you know what, I really need this conversation to happen. We need to talk about coinage. Let's talk about coinage. And so I'm going to drop that in there. But I think a lot of it too is I don't handhold too much. And so I try to just drop things. Like I've never explained the coinage. I don't explain it in the appendices. It's a silver. Well, oh, that's a better silver. Oh, good for you. So I'm not going into like a whole bunch of detail on that. And because the characters know what it is. I don't need my characters to explain that this is a penny and this is a dollar. And hopefully you just trust me that I know what I'm talking about. And I do. I have notes, I promise. And I'll probably put it on the website. But
it was the way you said that, though, which I never actually thought about it that way. But that makes so much sense as to why it does feel so natural and so real. Because, you get a book and they're like, oh, I flipped the silver penny. That was this weight compared to these coins. And it's like, it's for you, the reader. But
yeah.
in that moment, they're not thinking about that. It's part of their world. And
what you wouldn't notice is when they hit Eddie City, they stop using coins and they switch to cash, because they're using paper bills. And so it suddenly switches over to the lire. And then when they leave Eddie, it's back to coinage for the Germanic race, the Germanic nations that are north of there. So, yeah.
All right, that makes so much sense. Yeah, that's another great reason to to have the interview and everything, with even the small things I just wouldn't have thought of. But yeah, it's just because your style too, with the way those things are just kind of there and just natural. you manage to get so much world building in there without ever feeling like you're just dumping it all out. And I can forgive info dumps every now and then
Oh yeah,
too. I'm not as
and
against
they're
them as some
necessary
people.
sometimes.
Yeah, and sometimes you
Yeah.
do just need to get the information out. But the format that you use in your books, and it was the same thing in Thrice, even on a much shorter book. It was we were just learning about the world and the lore as we went, and so it all just felt so incredibly natural. Um, so it's
I also realized I didn't realize I was doing it until I looked at it a few months ago. Is that when I think something's looking world dumpy, it's because it's longer than 4 sentences. And so if I have something that I need it to be a big fat info dump, except when you get to like a Council of Elrond scene, like the cathedral chapters in Bone Shroud, it was much later in the books, but I feel like I'd already earned the right to make it. If I had put it in the first 5 chapters of book 1, would have been just awful. So, but if you sparse out your world building with actions that are actually happening, like you're sitting around a campfire and you dump a little bit, and then you move to someone feeding the fire, and then go back to more dumping. That's what we do in real life, right? We go out to a beer with somebody, we go out for a beer with somebody, and that's all we're doing is info dumping at each other the whole time we're drinking, right? But at the same time, you're talking to me, and I'll look off and read the tap list. That's an action. It doesn't mean that I'm not involved in the conversation. I'm just doing something to maybe take my eyes off of the football game that's distracting me. So we do little things to distract ourselves, and so we can do that to readers too, is distract you with someone putting spider eggs in the fire on the pan and frying them up enough that you can get a little bit more info dumpy. So
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So we do have some comments here, which so Andrew thinks I'm suspicious. Tori thinks you're suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, together we're the devil, but lawful evil devil. We do have a couple of actual questions though, including what you use your cork board for.
I just put this up I just made this today so I could look really smart on the conversation today. But I'm trying to figure out what I'm trying to write this year. So I've got all my quarters, and then I'll move things up as I have room or move them down as I fail to meet my current expectations. So all the green ones are stories and short stories for Kalatai and Needle and Leaf, and then the purple are some I'd like to get to short stories and stuff that I need to write. So yeah,
nice.
I'm gonna fill it out.
Definitely not Swiss cheese then. Is what I'm hearing.
No.
Okay.
No, and I forgot to grab strings.
There we go. Make it look all crazy. Yeah. So we do have. Oh, here's a nice question too. So Tori wanted to know what your favorite character is to write, and then my favorite character to read.
How about you answer it first, so I don't make you say, "Oh yeah, that's mine."
Well, see,
I know what I'm gonna say.
I have a feeling that if not your favorite, it's going to be at least one of your favorites because I've seen you talk about it. But for me, it's got to be Jinid Brostein, just because I don't even know why I started to like him, but I just immediately liked the character. I love his probably a close second, especially after book 2, would be Prima Pater Dorian for reasons we'll get into later.
Yeah.
Because I so many scenes with him I just loved, but I just loved the way his personality with Jinid, the way he thinks about things, the way he works, the way he's just very like calmly accomplishing things, and then like this is what's wrong with this, and he's not like getting angry or over the top. It's just his whole kind of worldview. I just loved reading that character.
Yeah, it comes across in Joven too, but Jinid is my irritation with the world because he just whatever. That's just kind of his attitude sometimes, and he accepts it and he does his job, but Jinid is the easiest to write. He's absolutely the easiest character for me to write. Because
is he your favorite?
He's so much me. Yes, he's my favorite.
Okay, just me.
He shouldn't have been. And it used to be Ralia, because Ralia used to be Rawl, but Rawl was a Gary Sue of me as a 12-year-old boy who was super awesome at fighting everything all the time. And so I pushed Ralia to the side as a secondary character and pushed Hannon up, who didn't exist in a much earlier version, so that he could do the job of being the main character, and then Ralia could grow for a bit. She needs 4 books to grow. Once we hit book 5, she will get a full POV, because I feel like by then she'll be her own character and won't just be a plaster version of myself.
Fair enough. We do have Tori said the Imbreeze fan club, but she did then accept Jinnit as a good answer there. So Tiago has some great insight here with talk a bit, dump a bit. That's what we do in real life.
Yep.
Which you're
anywhere you want. Put it on a shirt.
And then we have love that you're able to keep Ralia the warrior archetype without making Hannon a weak character to bolster that.
The only thing about her I wish I could have changed earlier on is that she's a barber, because Rawl was a barber. So changing it to a she and having her still be the hair cutter felt tropey, but I've not drawn a whole lot of attention to it. She shaves the heads. That's what she does. It's not because she's a hairdresser. It's just what she's good at, because she's good with a knife and you trust her.
It felt like kind of an interesting part of the personality too, because she's this warrior, and she's like totally badass. But they're like, hey, can you cut my hair? And whatever, sure, here, yeah. And that's just something else she does,
right? Between her and Hannon, she's the more physically OCD, and so to be the barber, if you ask me, I will clean you up too, and because it just makes her so much happier to have everything in order.
Fair enough. Yeah,
it's probably a bit of my wife coming out from there.
Yeah, their whole dynamic, I think, does work really well, and I think it works too that it's not the exact trope that you'd expect it to, and having Hannon, he's like the brother, so he's got to be the strong warrior, and no, it's like Ralia could definitely beat the crap out of him if she wanted to, and he's not the fighter and everything, and so he's the one who's more doing the figuring out some contracts and whatnot and all that kind of thing. But it just makes an interesting dynamic with them too in general, and with the kind of the family history that's set up with them as well too.
Yeah.
So we've gotten, we almost immediately got a little bit out of order, because there were a couple things we kind of touched on already, which I figured this would happen too. And I'm totally fine to just let the conversations kind of go as we went. But I know, because you talked a little bit about your early writing and some of your inspirations a little bit. And I know you said you started writing some of this stuff back in '95, I believe, was right?
Yeah, I would have been about 13, and I just read the Bulgariad, and I wrote this amazing story called The Collation Quest, which was a fanfic of just Pawn of Prophecy, not the rest of the series. Just a Wagon Incendaria, and I threw in some Ninja Turtles in the Hrogrins for good measures, and small elves, because that was Tasselhoff Barefoot. So that was when I started writing it. But then I was also figuring out the Hrogrin alphabet at 15, which has now been completely redesigned, and it kind of ticks me off because I had it memorized. I could actually write in Hrogrin. And now I can't, because I've completely designed it to be a cohesive alphabet. So I have to rememorize that. My son will probably memorize it before I do.
But the real question is, did you have a scene where a character happens to overhear the whole evil plot and then go and tell everyone about it?
No, they were actually the 4 kids. The 4 kids were off in like in the city, the little town. And when they come back, the farm's been burnt down. And so they all got to go, and they're just 4 kids, and they meet an imperial prince who's a Hrogrin, and they find a giant tree, and it's it was so much of everything that I was reading at the time just plastered on. But it's why I'm a big advocate now for kids writing fanfic and acknowledging that's what they're doing. Because if you are writing fanfic and you're writing fanfic, it makes it easier for you to decouple yourself when you hit college and are writing more original stories for yourself. But I didn't know that, and I would never admit that I was fanficking, because it was a totally original idea. And so because of that, it took me a long time. It's why I had to quit writing between my first draft in 2011 and my writing draft in 2017, is because I had to let it die. And then when I came back, it improved everything. I mean, Jinnid's a best example of that. Is he was the secondary character. It was just Rawl, Jinnid, and Soraya on the road, and it was a lot of just them being on the road and talking about nothing. It was so stupid. But Jinnid was half Dane, so he was chauvinist. He didn't quite get it, and I was also writing in my early 20s, and that's just how it came out. And so when I redid it, and I said, you know what, these three are not even in each other's story anymore. We're going to do our own thing. It's totally against the rules, but they're going to do their own stories that are just happen to be near and around each other. And Jinnid just exploded as a character by taking that out and pushing all of his sexism into Dane. Oh, it healed him so much, and made him so much better of a character because of that. And so that's why Jinnid is so easy to write, is because he's no longer Danish. Dane-ish, not Danish. Dane-ish.
It's his interactions with Dane too. I just absolutely loved, because, and it's saying this really vaguely for those, if there's anybody who hasn't read on it, but it's like you have Dane, who is, he's definitely a foil and just causing all kinds of problems, and seeing the specific ways that he's dealt with basically by Jinnid, and just it's some really, really enjoyable interactions, I feel like, especially there. That's a big one. But so
like I said, I think it was Sarah Ferrari is reading it, and she got to Day of Bread, and she's like, Dane again, and I said, yep, but I love what Jinnid did, and I said, you know what, there's always good time in life to be petty, and Jinnid gets a little petty with him, and I love it. Yeah. We might have to talk about this a little more in the spoiler section, because I keep stopping myself from talking about certain scenes, but I wanted to keep it spoiler free a bit with it. So we'll get to Tori. I see you stole one of my questions, and you have it in the chat, because I have that written down just for the record. But we'll get to that in a minute. But so on the kind of the revisiting, retooling, and like separating yourself from the inspirations, were you always planning on someday turning this into a series, or becoming an author in general, or was there an impetus that kind of made you come back to it? I think since 95 I wanted to be a writer, and in fact I think I found it. I need to go find it again. I have a folder of the pitch that I sent to Tor at age 13. I hadn't written it yet, but they were going to love my pitch so much they were going to pay me to write it. And I think I sent it. It would not surprise me if my parents just made sure it didn't go in the mail. But they never replied. I never quite understood, because it was such a great idea. So that's when I thought about doing it, and through all the way through college I did. So that's where a lot of this world building comes from. Is in college I'd be bored in class, and so I had notebooks and notebooks of me just drawing, doodling, writing down ideas, and it would actually help me focus in class, because I was doing something with my hand and listening, so I wasn't thinking about other things. So it helped me focus in class. Not that I was a straight A student, but
the idea of 13-year-old you sending a pitch to Tor is just, especially because it's Tor, that makes it even funnier to me for some reason, specifically too.
It was like double spaced in like Times New Roman on an old computer, so digital. I can still see it. It's in a yellow folder, so it's somewhere in my storage. I'll find it and have to put it up sometime.
I would love to see that. That's just fantastic. I absolutely love that. So we were talking about characters a little bit, so it's a pretty good, and it's very specifically something I also was going to ask about as I was joking. But Tori asks about how you came up with the aspects and vows that you included in the Holy Order, and that's something I was curious too, just because you have there's a really big religious focus, which we can talk a little bit about too. But even just within the Paladins, it feels like a very complete set. And I know in the past you've talked about too, you wanted Paladins who actually like do something and are real and aren't just caricatures. And so how did that all come to be?
So I feel like the vows for the Paladin specifically go back quite a ways, even to before 2011. But 2011 was when it was also a year that I stopped reading fantasy for like a year until I found Mistborn. But I was reading Pillars of the Earth and Name of the Rose and several books and even about monasticism in general, and that really rounded things out. Pillars of the Earth, it takes place in a monastery, right? The whole thing does, and the characters are so believable. From the cellarer who doesn't believe, he doesn't believe in God. He's just there because he got a job, and he does a great job at it too. And Prior Philip is just the best character in the whole book. He's realistic. He has absolute flaws, and he makes huge mistakes, and then he comes back from those. And it was just like, this is what I want in a paladinial order, is three-dimensional monks who are there because, I don't know, what else am I going to do? Other people who are there because they're Danes, and they're there because they're going to burn the witch and burn the heretic. And so I started with that. The vows came out of that because if you look at like medieval monks, they take all those vows. They take all those vows of chastity, poverty, silence, which is not technically a vow because they can still talk in the middle of meetings. Were just supposed to be quiet. So we always have this preconceived notion of, well, a vow of silence means you don't talk ever. And in medieval times, in the Middle Ages, that was not true. They were just supposed to defer, which I kind of push away into kind of the minor vows or even the aspects of the Chrysalis. So I did that, and then took fantasy tropes of blindness and silence and just plastered that on, but said, but what if each paladin only picked one? And that was because I think paladames were already in existence, and I wanted to be able to have like, where do paladin babies come from? Well, the ones that don't take the vow of chastity, and even then, not all of them get married too. Just because you don't have vow of chastity doesn't mean you don't get married. It just means you have the option open. So that's where I got my 6. You don't see blindness at all because it's now a defunct vow for reasons. What was a lot harder to do was to design the aspects of the Chrysalis, and that was because I already had tropes in my head that I was building, like, well, they're from the goddess of purity. It's like, well, what does that mean? Well, it means virgins. No. Okay, let's really look at this. And so I really got deep into how I wanted to make sure I wasn't just, well, they're just all Vestal virgins and blah, blah, blah. And so I said, well, what is purity? And I really got into a deep dive study on what can purity mean. And that then blew up into the 4 branches of their aspects, where each aspect is something that is either an outward show of purity, whether it's keeping your hands clean or having a strict diet, to other vow or other aspects. And I call them aspects because they're not full vows. They're not meant to, the paladinial vows are meant to suppress. They're meant to give you a very specific lens to see your world through, versus the aspects are meant to be donned like clothing that can be sometimes changed and switched like a flower changing its leaves. And so I just wanted to really delve into that so that the characters felt so that they felt real, and so that you could have, you can also start shorthanding when you're reading. Oh, she has a gold tiara. She's of the vow of virginity. Okay, it's not a big deal, but it then draws attention to, okay, she's probably in Andrew's story not going to have a romantic story unless she is. And so then you can take that out of your mind and focus on the story that I'm prepping you for. So it's a little bit of a painter's stroke to kind of draw attention to where you should be looking and where you shouldn't be looking.
Interesting. Yeah. It is one of those things with just even, the people who only eat certain things or do certain things, and kind of seeing the difference. And I really like that it's multiple different kinds of, whether it's the vows or the aspects on the different sides of the board. It makes the orders feel distinct and also a lot more detailed. As another thing that really, for me, made it feel quite a bit more real, and the kind of distinction with it. And so it's interesting to hear just like how deep you intentionally did a lot of those things, because it really comes across really, really well.
Thank you.
So we do have, well, we'll do this before, because we were kind of talking about I should paladin storks and stork Love it. But I am interested here. I actually have an opinion on this myself. But so with Tori asking, saying epic fantasy stories can often benefit from a percolation period over time to develop. Do you think authors rush through things too fast to get books out sometimes?
It depends on the story. Collation took a long time to percolate. Thrice did not, but that's because I challenged myself to start a book in 3 weeks. So I was pitching Collation out to agents and said, I need something new to write. And so I said, oh, you know what? I'm going to take this list of tropes I wanted to write into and say I give myself 3 weeks to prep. And then I dove in and started writing it and then wrote it over that winter. So that one didn't have any percolation because I was forcing myself to write it and really wanted to. And I worked hard because I needed to prove to myself I could write something outside of the Collation series. So percolation doesn't have to happen at the beginning, but I am a huge advocate for alpha and beta reads and long ones if you can afford it. So like after I write a story, I go back, even though a lot of authors don't, I go right back through and polish it again just to double check everything's working. And then I have alpha readers I send it to and I give them, theirs is usually pretty short because they read fast. So I'll give them 2 to 3 weeks and hey, can you just read this and tell me if it worked? They'll come back and tell me what didn't work. And then I'll go and edit it again. But when I send it off to betas, it will be 2 to 6 months. And I'll say, you know what? I'm working on something else. Please take your time because I need time to space myself away from to take a break from the book. And then when they come back, I've already thought about a bunch of things I want to change. Or as their notes come in, I'll start thinking about things. And that lets me ramp back up and edit it before I send it off to an editor. So I think every book needs a percolation period. It's just a matter of when it needs it.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm obviously I'm not an author, nor will I ever be because I can't write more than a very small amount before my brain won't do it anymore. But I've read series and even some that I've like loved where I'm like, man, I wish I was reading this but you wrote it like 10 years from now when you were more ready for the story, because sometimes things just feel like the author wasn't quite ready to tell the story they're trying to tell. And I mean, that's not always the case. I've read, fantastic debuts as well. And so it's, and sometimes you'll hear that though, like, oh yeah, this has been, percolating for 15 years or something like that. And other people just kind of go out and write it and it can be done. So I agree. It does depend on the story, but yeah. I've definitely read some books where I'm like, you probably could have let this sit a bit and worked on it and done more so that it just felt a little more polished as well. So
however, Tori, I will say you're ready. Don't percolate. I need bloodstones written.
There you go. You heard it here. So I did want to pivot back to when we were talking about like the aspects of the orders and just talk a little bit about the religious focus that we get specifically in Collation too. We definitely will talk probably a bit more about Thrice as well with some of those things too. I feel like I'm focusing a little on Collation, and I really enjoyed Thrice too. I mean, that was also a 5-star read for me, but Collation, there's so many like deeper things I had to dig into, so that's why a lot of my questions have been kind of focused there. But so the choice to have such a religious focus, where we have the paladins and the paladains, and most of our characters are centric to religion, besides the Black Sentinels, as a side note too, the fact that we've got paladins, paladains, and then some mercenaries thrown in for good measure. It's such an interesting combination, especially how things come together. But what made you want to focus so much on the religious aspects?
I wanted to delve into a story that had a pantheon of gods that felt lived in as well, and ask the questions that I didn't feel a lot of books were asking. Like, if you have multiple gods and they're all very separate religions, how do they interplay with each other in a way that is realistic and doesn't feel D&D-ish? Of, oh well, all the gods exist, but let's just go attack the other gods' people. And like, it's probably not a good idea. What happens if the god literally rises? Well, we'll just kill him. Like, sure about that? And so it's just kind of, it's a story adventure. It's an RPG. It doesn't matter. But I wanted a book that did that, and also, like Tolkien has the Valar, but they don't have a lot of interaction unless they do. But what if they did? What if we did have all of them coming down and being just always involved? What does that do? And but also not in a way that it's like, well, there's the one God King, like Torak, who just says, well, I'm just going to rule. Because of course he would. That totally makes sense. That he makes sense in that sense. But then the other gods are like, oh, I don't know, I'm going to go get drunk. You're like, okay, so, got it. So you're Thor. And so what happens, and a lot of that is also saying, okay, I take that idea and then I overlay it with Europe and Asia, where you have the Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church. How do those interplay with each other? I know how it works in our world. But what happens if they are literally different churches that follow a literally different God and aren't arguing over we follow the same God? No, we're different. And then just see what happens. And then you throw in humanity too, which just makes it messy. So.
Oh, for sure. Well, and it's some of the exact things you said too, which is absolutely how my brain works. And it's one of the reasons why, like, I don't really want to talk about religion in real life that much, but I will talk about fantasy religions for days.
Mm-hmm.
It's always something that fascinates me. And I really like a religious focus. And like I mentioned to you, another series that I absolutely love, Crown of Stars by Kate Elliott, is also very, very religion centric. And a lot of it is based around Catholicism, but with a lot of different things thrown in for the world, and just the way things are discussed, and like the differing accounts where like certain groups believe a different thing, or even just believe something happened differently, and how much of an impact that can have. And then when you have a series where the gods are also present, that's just, there's so many more interesting things. How does that work, and with the different orders? And I think too, which I wasn't planning on talking about this question now, but I feel like the segue is kind of there. I think that plays into just kind of some of the different ways that you write too, where it's not like, and I think it was, you were talking about some of the Slavic influences with Thrice, especially, where it's more so like things are out there, or like, there's danger out there, there's things out there, but it's not necessarily let's go kill it. It's just like it's there, things might happen.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some other things with, like, we have these other gods, we have these other religious orders, most of them are somewhat intertwined or get along, and it's like they're there, but that's not the conflict. Like the conflict is separate. And I think that works really well with that kind of world. Is, if there's all these real gods, your god is real, and their god is real, fighting is probably not the best idea, because we know they're
it also
real.
Contextualizes atheism quite a bit too. Is how do you justify it? And that's hard. And you're gonna have atheists. You're gonna have to say, you know what? Until I see it, I don't want to believe it. Okay, I get that. But what if you have so much evidence that you can't deny it? What do? Well, then you get someone like CERN, who is he atheist or is he not? Does he just say, well, I'm just gonna, I prefer just to not be seen by them? There's somebody else in the book who has that thought. So what does that mean? Well, it's not. Yeah, and so there's just so many different ways you can overlay things. Yeah, I love it.
It's just, it's such a fascinating topic for me, and it's one of the reasons why I just I so quickly, I'm like, I was just so invested reading the books. With Collation, it was a lot of that was just the world building and how it was set up. And then with Thrice, it was the characters and the world building and the way that was done that just kind of pulled me in. And so, since I brought it up, talking about some of the Slavic origins, but that kind of just Eastern European doing different things than just the typical Western kind of England or that general area type of fantasy, doing that kind of things, and having that different focus. Could you talk a little bit about just how that changes, not just the inspirations, but the way things happen and develop with the stories?
Yeah. So with Thrice, it's funny because I've never actually shown that there's a formal religion on Balatar at all. I mention the philosophies, or the Havats being a bloodline of people, but it's very philosophy based. So, and that was part of me challenging myself, is how do I do it where there are gods, but they're not well, here's the bear temple and here's the bee temple. It's no, they're just out there. Because yeah, they're the Fae that are outside of everything that you know. And so how do humans who don't have a temple to a god focus their philosophies? And it became, there's like, I haven't even written them all down, so admittedly there's a lot less world building done on that one. I think I've said there's 12 or 20 different philosophies that wane and wax and wane, and not Mistborn. They wax and wane, and certain ones hold sway. In the second book, there's a counter, there's a sideways, more violent philosophy to the Umernosti, who are just Umernosti, but with anger problems, anger issues.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's and that's even with Thrice. And that was kind of the thing, is the amount of world building that's done. And I think I said passively earlier. It's almost more like casual, not really passive necessarily. I feel like the best word, but it's just as we're going along. And that's where Thrice especially felt kind of slice of life, because we're traveling, and it was never like, oh, we're going to go out and hunt the beast, but a beast might show up, and we're going to have to deal with it if it does. And just the way that we learned about things so organically throughout, and it felt like, even in such a short story, it's really hard to make a world feel real in a short amount of time. And there are some authors, which I'd put yourself in there too, that are fantastic at it. But it's like, it's really hard to do, to make a world feel authentic and real and vast when you don't have a ton of time to do it. And so that was just something too with Thrice. That's where I'm like, okay, I'm like, this Andrew D. Meredith guy, he's someone to pay attention to just from reading that, because it's really well done.
Thank you. That one was done because I built it as a comic book, basically. I was reading a lot of Usagi Yojimbo, which is one of my favorite comic books ever. But it's an episodic samurai rabbit on the road. And what adventures is he having this issue? And so when I outlined it, I said, okay, we're going to do this. It's Lone Wolf and Cub, but Slavic. I want every issue to be two halves of a 30-minute show. And so every other chapter is basically a new issue. And so we can work our way through. And if you read 2 chapters and put the book down, good job. You read a comic book. And so I wanted to hit that pacing of it's a juggernaut. It's just rolling towards the end, and at a pace that you can easily digest, but also fly through. I mean, it's only 70,000 words, so you can read it in an afternoon.
That was, which also a question I just crossed out, since you're now stealing my questions too. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, there was something I was going to bring up, and it's funny too, because I did both with that book. I read the first half just very quickly, absolutely loved it, and then like I ended up being like really busy for the rest of the week, and so I was reading it more episodically, and like it flowed so well either way. I felt like reading a bunch at once flowed really well, but then it was like that. It's where I could read a little bit, and I felt like, oh, it's okay to put this down. I'm not constantly being like, wow, this is a terrible place to put this down. And so it's what made it, I feel like, a kind of a relaxing read too, because no matter how much time I had, I could get a very satisfying bit of the story. So that was, I was going to ask about,
and like even the danger in that. There's no danger in Thrice that makes you go, I have to keep reading because what if? You're like, it was never meant to be that. It's written. I mean, it was written to be read fast, because it's all the chapters are shorter too. They're 75% the length of what I normally write at with collation, because I wanted something that was going to be quick. You could probably read a chapter on a lunch break. That is not entirely true with collation.
Sorry, I was muting to yell at my dog, who really wants to join the stream. But yeah, and it's because the pacing with Thrice 2 being that kind of episodic is, I feel like, very different from collation, because collation is much more so getting into kind of a longer story. And so, and I think it's interesting seeing the 2 books, and I think they both work really well, even though they're very different. But collation definitely feels like it's more the kind of just slowly going along with it. But it's also, it's not a book where you're constantly like, and it's not a book I don't feel like it's made to have you on the edge of your seat, like what's going to happen. You know, it's not like it's a thriller or there's going to be some huge thing. It's just that book where you're just like sitting back and just
Yeah.
reading and enjoying. Which, because I know Andrew and I and you, the other Andrew, I should say, we're talking about like whether or not it's cozy or not and everything too. And it's like it kind of is and it isn't, because like it's not what you would necessarily think of when you hear cozy, but it is just
Yeah.
sitting
Comfy.
back, relaxing, reading, and just being immersed. It does it so well. So um yeah, so kind of on the topic of just the pacing, the story format, this kind of could have gone earlier or now too, but I've heard you very specifically say that you put in moments of normalcy
Mhm.
in your books, and it's something that I found that was something I did not know I enjoyed a lot until
Yeah.
only the last couple of years, where I've read some other things that do that, like some Robin Hobb in like the Fitz book will have just the quiet moments, and it
Yeah.
just makes it feel richer and pulls you in. So how important is that to you, and um, how
It,
much do you
it's
put that in?
becoming more important to me the more I write, and I didn't realize how much I wanted to do it until I did it. Um, the example I used came long after I wrote these books, and that's Bluey. In the cartoon Bluey, they'll have these episodes suddenly where like it's a whole shot of ants walking across the sidewalk, and the kids are fascinated with it. And it's just an episode to slow down and go, chill out. Let's just be kids. And we already do that in fantasy. I mean, opening scene of every single, how many fantasies opens in the inn? What kind of inn is it going to be? And it's going to set the tone for what you're doing. And then you also know that every time they hit an inn, boom, now we can reset ourselves. Okay, here's the inn for this country. So you're resetting yourself constantly. So fantasy already does it. I just did it more cozy. And that was also because, again, something I felt wasn't being done right was board games in fantasy. Rothfuss did it great. I really loved of the problems I have with book 2. I love him playing the game. I can't think of what it's called right now, but the road game.
I
And I
actually
was a
still
board
haven't
game
read
designer
that,
for a
so I
bit.
can't confirm.
What? Oh yeah. So there's just a board game, and they play it, and it has a really heavy plot element. Well, then there's another book, I won't even name it, but the author puts in a board game and then literally lays out exactly how it's played with almost the rules. So you're like, oh, I know how to play the game now. Except that by doing that, it can now never be kickstarted, because if it's not exactly as it's written, it won't work. And he didn't have a game designer design it, and so it probably doesn't work, and it's probably a terrible game. And so when I like write about Edifos and stuff, I'm very, very vague on, I know how it plays, and I'm going to design it and eventually make it, I promise. But I have an idea of how it works, and I don't want to say anything more than that in the book, so that you have an idea of how it might be played, so that you know that they're just playing a board game. There's no plot. There's no plot purpose for that. It's a chance for them to talk. It's a chance for them to smack talk with each other and establish who's the better player. But it also is a great chance to world build, and I love doing that. So that was important, was to do something like that. The moments of normalcy of sitting around a campfire and telling the story, and saying, you know what, stop the plot. We're going to tell a story now. Why? Yeah, because I feel like it. And if someone wants to skip past that, like they skip past a prologue, I don't know why somebody would do that, but you can.
Because they're a monster. I mean, that's why. But
Absolutely.
the fact that people actually do that drives me nuts. I wonder how many really do. But you always like, if there's a poll or something, there'll be like a few who are like, yeah, I don't read prologue. My wife says that to me. I think she says it partially just to like make me mad, because she knows it will. She's like, you read the prologue and the epilogue? And I'm like, yes, of course I do. Absolutely.
It's like those who read the ends of a mystery book first, and you're like, oh man.
I just don't get it. I can't. Yeah.
Hi, Lana.
Oh my gosh. But it's, well, like the board game thing too. It's kind of like we were talking earlier, where like characters aren't gonna just sit and every time they mention coins, describe exactly how coinage works, and kind of with a board game too, because you get that a lot. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's the author telling you, the reader, like, oh, this is how this is played. And I've seen so many times too where it's done as like, I'm teaching this person how to play the game. But
Hmm.
it's like, it somehow does make it feel so much more real when it's just like, no, this is just what they're doing. They know how to play the game already. They're not going to explain the rules to you, the reader. You just can kind of infer a little bit or just have it be a part of the world. And so
Yeah.
it's amazing how some of those little things make it feel so much more real.
Yeah. Yeah. It really does.
Yeah. We do have Lana did make it. She apologizes for being late, but we're still talking
Okay.
away. Plenty of time. Um, but we'll probably, I do have some other non-spoiler topics, but we're getting closer to where I'm going to be like, okay, we got to talk some spoilers now. And we've been going for about an hour, so I like to make sure we don't go too crazy long. We'll probably do that here in a bit. I will change the banner and warn everybody once we get there. But the one of the things I wanted to bring up the whole time, it never quite segued to it, but I know it's you were telling me before you came prepared for it, talking about the he's very prepared, the flora, the fauna, the appendixes that we have and more. So I'm gonna try and put him on the big screen so we can see this.
Let's see if we can get this to focus.
Yeah,
No, it's not going to focus. All right. Well, worthy effort, I guess. But
I say
this
you can see
sheet
the
here,
large chart.
this sheet is my insanity. So this is my biome sheet, my master biome sheet, and I've got over here archetypes of like mythical creatures because I replaced every single animal in Calatai with mythical creatures. So there's no cats, there's no dogs, there's manticores and infalts instead because why not, right? So what I did is like, okay, griffin. Well, I on a separate sheet have the different sizes of different griffins so that I can then in this fill out my biome to figure out what's my apex predator in this particular area and what's my not apex, but what's my largest herbivore, right? Because a rhino is not an apex predator, but it's not something you want to mess with. And that way I can say, well, I kind of want to have a monster attack here. So do I have an apex predator attack or do I have a swarm attack or do I have a them, piss off a rhino basically. And so so I built that and also because I replaced everything, which I can explain why I did that. But I replaced everything, so I needed to make sure I knew what the food chain was. So so I could do they're walking along instead of saying, well, there's eagles flying in the sky and you could see horses in the field. I could say there's Sleipnirs. What's a Sleipnir? Figure it out yourself later. And just move on until it matters. And so I don't explain what an infalt is or an auric for a long time. And then Whisper shows up in book 2. But aurochs, I think in the first chapter it calls them the bovine auroch, but what is it? And if you're a myth freak like I am, well, that's the big bulls of old Europe, except mine are different. So, but the reason I did that was because for a long time it was humans, Hrogrins, and then all other fantasy creatures that have always existed, like elves, dwarves, minotaur, whatnot. And then I realized it was like, why don't I just call the Hrogrins orcs? And I didn't want to because they're my Hrogrins. They're my babies. I made them up when I was, in 13 and based them off my Ninja Turtle fandom and all that. And so I kept those and I said, well, okay, fine. Let's change the elves to not elves. And they became the Kavili, which are amphibious kangaroo giraffe things. And after I did that and started playing around with all of my sentient races, I was like, well, then why do I have horses and dogs? Why don't I just have griffins everywhere and manticores everywhere in houses, in people's houses, and flying, winged monkeys? And so I just started throwing the kitchen sink at it, and I just kind of tripped and fell into it.
Hey, I mean, it's another thing I love with fantasy, and I completely get why, because it's not the most practical thing to do, and I do not by any means expect every fantasy author to do that. But one of the greatest things about fantasy is you get to make all this stuff up.
Yeah.
It's a fantasy world. You've got fantasy creatures, and there aren't that many, even ones who do it really, really well with like having it just be such a high fantasy world where everything's fantastical.
Yeah.
You still usually have a lot of the common things, which I have no problem with. But then when you go in and just have everything be foreign, it just makes the world that much more interesting. And it's another thing where it feels like an oxymoron, but it makes it almost feel more real, because instead of being like, oh, they've got, horses like normal, it's like, yeah, they've got these fantasy creatures that, it's a six-legged beast for that we're riding like a horse, and it's just so normal too. And it's like, it's not brought up a lot, because when you're starting it, there are a lot of those things that it's not really explained what they are until it comes up, um, and everything, which is interesting. But it's, yeah, I just love like having all of the different fantasy creatures and with it. And like Sanderson did that with Stormlight, which was
Absolutely. And
his
proved it
series
could
where
be done.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
and that's like he has other series that have more normal things and everything too, but like that's like, no, this world completely alien and foreign. And it's fun to do. And I love digging into that stuff. So that's why I remember because after I finished Deathless Beast, I sat and listened to all of the appendixes that just were talking about the orders and the stuff. And I'm usually not that bad. Like, I don't normally do that. Like, I could never get through all the appendixes at the end of Return of the King, I'll admit it. But I'm just I'm like, oh, I love this. I want to know more. And then he tells me, like, I'm planning on these really big things talking about all the plants on Galatine. I'm like, why am I excited about that? It sounds ridiculous, but
plants are going to be hard for me to
it.
do because there actually aren't. I didn't replace everything in that one, so I kind of cheated with that, except for Andrew Wizard's favorite, Grief Dark.
Grief Dark.
But there's only a few odd plants I'll mention as needed, but almost everything is normal. Like, I'll mention oaks and whatnot, and then when I need to make something, I make it up. So, but I do need to sit down and do some of that work. That'll be fun. Maybe I'll consult you.
Hey, I'm down for it. The Grief Dark thing always makes me laugh, because that was the first time I heard about you. It was Andrew talking to me about that. I wasn't familiar with you. I hadn't read any of your books, and he's like, "I'm reading this book, and I'm so confused because he used Grief Dark, and it took me like forever to realize that's a plant." And I'm just like, "What are you talking about?" Because we'll send each other random stuff like that from books sometimes, and so then I started reading it, and it's just made me chuckle every time Grief Dark was mentioned, just for that whole little thing.
And I keep finding places to put it in.
I as much as possible, just to bother Andrew,
And I am still working on trying to get a shirt made.
Yes,
a Grief Dark shirt.
I'm definitely down for that as well.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we teased it earlier, but I think we've gotten through most of what I wanted to do, and I feel like this it doesn't feel like it's been an hour for me, for the record. I it's the same, but I'm seeing the time, but I'm like, that's why I wrote things down, to keep myself somewhat on topic, because it's so easy to just go off. But I did want to spend a little more time talking about your audiobooks and your audiobook work as well. We talked about that a bit at the beginning, and I think we've had some new people jump on since then as well. But so just as a reminder, Andrew D. Meredith does narrate audiobooks. If you need an audiobook, he is great. He narrates his own and does a really great job as well, and he'll send you stuff if you want to know as well. But it's just talking about the audio in general. And I know in some other ones you said it did take you some time and some trial and error to get it right, and you were spending like 6 hours to get 1 good hour of audio. Still and everything with that as well. That's the still number. I wasn't sure if that changed.
Yeah,
it's an interesting process, because I feel like it's so easy to make like the most minor slip up when you're recording an audiobook and then have to redo things. And so I'm kind of curious about just the process in general, and how you got into that, as well as specifically to how you develop your individual voices, because I swear every side character, no two are quite the same, even if it's some random old guy that's just here. It's like slightly different, and the voices all feel pretty unique. Even CERN, who I didn't realize was Nathan Fillion for a while, which I hear it so clearly now, and I'm mad I didn't pick up on it, just because I think I wasn't looking for it. But
I have a couple other actors I would totally ask to play him, but he's top of my list. In the same way, and I'm saying this out loud on an interview right now, in the same way that when they made Stranger Things, when they wrote it, they said, well, I want the mom to be, like, what's the actress's name who plays the mom in Stranger Things? Oh my God. Anyway, the writers said, we want it to be someone like her. And they said, well, why don't we just call her And they're like, we could call her. Yeah, give us a second. Like the next day they had her on and she signed up, and it was who they wrote it for. And CERN is who I want. Winona Ryder. Yes, Winona Ryder.
It was going to drive me nuts.
It was written for Winona Ryder, and they got Winona Ryder, and it worked. It worked fantastic. So yeah, I totally wrote it. I wrote it with Nathan Fillion in mind, because of non spoilers, things that happen. I really wanted Nathan Fillion, our beloved captain, to drive us through with us trusting him the whole time, because he's awesome. And who doesn't love Nathan Fillion?
I would absolutely love to see him play that part. Absolutely. 100%.
So audiobooks. So my wife is a writer too, and we had hired an actor up in Spokane to read it, and she's a fantastic reader. And when it got to my book, someone was like, we cannot afford to do audiobooks, because we really wanted to launch with audiobooks, because there was a whole talk back then of China was taking books and immediately just uploading it through their translators and putting it up, and then authors were going 6 months later and getting blocked by Amazon because of anti-plagiarism laws. Like, but I'm the writer and it's not mine. Sorry, it's already there. Too bad. And so we said, fine, never going to be a thing. We're going to upload the day our book comes out. There's going to be an audiobook. So we fought for that. So when I did that, so I decided I needed to record it, and I knew Thrice was going to be first. And so I said, you know what? Let's buy a mic. And the worst that happens is I lose a month of my life, and we have a nice mic now, because I knew it would take me a month to record it and edit it along with my job. And I did lose a month of my life because I recorded it. I was loving what was happening. I was learning everything, and I got 75% of the way through editing it. And I had learned some things and realized I basically trashed the original files. And so I had to do it all over again. And so I did. And it was so worth it. And even listening back to Thrice now, it's still not as good as Collation was, because I learned things in that second re-record that I was able to adapt when I did Collation. So I just learned so much through that process, and it was worth the month of getting used to listening to my own voice, which is the hardest part, honestly. Is a lot of people who are like, oh, I can read a book, but I hate the sound of my own voice. You're like, you have to get over that part, or just you got to suck it up.
I say editing yourself through a whole audiobook, I feel like it would definitely take some getting used to, for sure.
Yeah.
Because you always sound different on a recording than you hear yourself and everything too.
Absolutely. Well, like I hear like stories of like twins, when they hear the sound of their twin's voice, they hate it. because it's their voice ruined, because we all have a different resonance in our head of how we hear the voice. So when you hear it on recording, that's what everybody else hears. So it's not you're not as nasally as you think. It's just nasally to you because your brain and mind your brain has adapted your voice to the way you like to hear your own voice. And so we do slowly have affectations that we've developed into our own voices. Like I'll do something and hear my dad's voice in me. And because I've adapted things in my childhood, like how I cough and how I clear my throat is how I think he sounds. But to him, it probably doesn't sound like that because he's hearing it from his point of view, right? I do voices because I did a lot of stage theater as I was a kid, and I've always read with voices. So like when I was dating my wife, I read the Bulgariad out loud with voices, and I have very specific voices that I use for everybody. Belgarath is Sean Connery, and absolutely Sean Connery.
That might make me enjoy this.
The only thing that I pull, so one thing I did pull, so here's a spoiler that's not spoilery. Slant is 100% Silk. It was you know what, I want Silk in my book, let's bring him over. And so I read Silk as I read Slant as I read Silk. So it's the same affectations, because it's like I've always loved reading it this way, and so he showed up in my book. Because it was a little bit, there was a little bit of fanficking happening with Thrice too, but because it was by design, it was different, right? So like when you build a character off of somebody and then allow it to evolve into something different. Nathan Fillion is a good example of that. I wrote him like Nathan Fillion, and the voice is read similar to him, but not, because one, I don't want to get sued, and too, because he's not Nathan Fillion. It's CERN. And so saying so it's like when we write, sometimes we'll shorthand and I'll say, like, Katiam is actually one of the hardest to make an example of that. But like Soraya is based on my wife, in her early 20s. But she's developed since then. But that's who I based her on to start with. Katiam's the one character probably in the whole book who's based on nobody I know. And that makes her the hardest to write too, because she has to actually exist as her own character. So
makes sense. So we'll probably there's a few questions and comments in the chat that we'll take a look at. So I will note we're going to be going to some spoilers here very, very soon. Which probably won't be a super long spoiler section because of how long it's been. So if anybody has any questions, just in case there's anybody on who has not read the books and does not want to stick around for the spoiler one, because it'll be kind of general spoilers for mostly collation with some Thrice thrown into. Just because there's a few things I am just dying to pick your brain about. But so anybody, if you've got other questions or anything, feel free to pop them in now, and then I'll circle back toward the end as well too. But back, I put neglect in the comments. We do. Tijuana agrees. If you don't read or epilogue, your monsters when we can't be friends. I agree. I'm here for it as well.
It's there for a reason.
And
so
then
Derek, I write in Scrivener when I'm writing, which allows me to do a lot of adjusting. And then once I've drafted, I move it all over into Pages so that it's in a different program with a different font size, so that when I'm editing it, it's a totally new book. But I spend way too much time copying and pasting back and forth between Scrivener and Pages. And then often an editor will need to use Word, which I don't have, and so I have to do it through Google Drive. So I'll then edit in Google Drive and then paste it back into Pages by hand. But that also lets me make sure that I'm reformatting. Reformatting can be helpful because it makes sure that it's laid out correctly. So my wife uses Evernote. I use Scrivener because it just works for me, even though it does have problems. So
I say that sounds a bit complex for the moving, but it was funny that Derek's here too, because his book actually lives right next to where your books live on my shelf.
Hey,
so it's the same size and fits.
Awesome.
We did have Tori, who was trying to save us with Winona Ryder in here as well, and Tiago saying Sony doesn't love Nathan Fillion, and they made Tom Holland Nathan Drake. And I will say, because I don't know if you have strong opinions about this, but like it should have been Nathan Fillion, but the Uncharted movie actually, I thought it was going to be terrible, and it was actually pretty fun in its own right. So,
but he is getting kind of old,
which is true. I know.
I mean, he will always be my captain, and when they make Firefly again, if he is not my captain, I don't know if I'll watch it.
I don't know.
I mean, I know it could work in the same way that Star Trek moved to Next Generation, but if Nathan Fillion is not the captain of the new ship, what's the point? He's on board. He'll do it.
Yeah, I can't imagine him not.
Yeah.
But yeah. And so then Tiago asked if you record at home.
I do. I have I've literally hung blankets up in the corner of my room. and I go in there, and it's actually really hard to get into, but I can step over the stool and get in there, and it's a nice tight soundproofed blanket thing for recording. And so I do record at home. Yeah.
I say you can make honestly with stuff like that, make it work really well. Yeah. I have a really tiny closet over here that I've recorded vocals in, which is a little too small, but what I started doing is I use this bookshelf. I move some of the books back and set a mic, and then just kind of cover it with soundproofing stuff.
Yeah,
it actually works. It works real well. I had to get a good mic that doesn't pick up a lot of background noise too, but it does work surprisingly well. We did have. I see, Derek, we're on the same page about the Uncharted movie. I thought it was pretty fun. It definitely wasn't the same, but they had some like nods to the game and also did its own thing. So yeah, I did think it was fun. I think we're all in agreement with Tiago.
You want to hear the Sean Connery voice? Yes, you rule the day you cross me, Trebek. But tell me, does it work?
Oh, fantastic! And even
Yeah.
even the SNL Celebrity Jeopardy reference,
Yeah.
which is just
We're
icing
doing
on
this
the
totally
cake.
over the top version, but yeah.
But Belgarath the Sorcerer is very fun to read because she's just such a smarmy little old wolf.
That was my exact reaction too.
Yeah.
But it's also happy to be book neighbors. So
Yeah, it is.
I don't think you can see it from this angle, but
No.
it's the purple one right here. Here.
Oh, yeah, between the
It's
two
just-
whites. Yep.
Yeah, because the big white piece is a backwards book because that's where your books go, and I didn't want them to fall over, so I have a book in there backwards to just hold the spot. But yeah, it's your guys' books are like the exact perfect size and fit on that shelf. So I always try to arrange by size as much as possible. So to get that going in. But okay, I think unless I'm going to do one last check and see if
I'm a Daniel Craig fan myself, but I'll take it, Jago.
I just saw that pop in. Oh my gosh. But so we'll probably if nobody else comes in the next like 5 to 10 seconds, we'll switch over the banner to spoilers and at least spend a little bit of time. I won't take up too much of your time with it, but I should mention actually before we do that, because I completely forgot to talk about this when we were talking about I very specifically strayed away from self-publishing related questions because if you want to tell them you're actually doing another live tonight talking about that.
Yeah, so I'll be on Kay's hidden bookshelf in almost 2 hours with Chago and Tori and Kay, and we're just going to talk about, it may end up being a 2-night event. Who could know? But it'll be about the process that we've all experienced as writers, authors, reviewers, and kind of covering the one-on-ones of things that you can be doing as a new author, and how you can curb your expectations, but also retain a goal towards the future. So we'll be talking about that.
I should have had links ready because I realized I did not put any links. So I'll probably have to add that. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that we talked about that a little bit too. So if you're like me and just can never get enough Andrew Meredith, you can check that out as well. And so that's why I didn't talk about self-publishing. I very specifically tried not to, because since you'll be talking about that later, I'm like, oh, I'll just ask all my other questions, since obviously I had plenty to fill out our time. Okay, so it's official. We're changing the banner to spoilers because there's a few things that are like borderline that I saved for this section here too. We got Sparrow Springs here now too. I just say, that's why I was pretty specific, because we had Derek who hasn't read these over yet. But yeah, we do have Andrew doing reading sprints too, and then Kay later. So yeah, we got a lot of fun live stuff going on tonight, for sure. But yeah, a couple of these are more borderline, but then others are like completely spoiler heavy.
Hit me.
So, well, and the kind of to introduce it with the way you write, where especially in a world that's very religion focused, we're following a lot of people that are part of religious orders, and a lot of things feel like it would be very black and white. And then the further you get, I'm sorry. I waited like an hour and 20 minutes. I did my best. There were some of these things I just wanted to talk about immediately. But this is the lead in, at least gives you a minute, because it's not quite, but it's like the further we get, the more you're not sure that the black and white is so black and white, and it's actually quite a lot more gray. And that's where, this leads directly into spoilers. So I lied, Sparrow. I'm sorry. But there's some specific characters too, where I feel like it's especially there for, like Dane, for example, who is like our foil, and he's part of the order, but he's just like, we hate him and he's bad, but he's also not necessarily like the bad guy. He's just kind of a terrible person. And then the thing that I still like, I feel like I should have somehow seen it coming, but it still like just took me by surprise. Was CERN and the way things end in
Yeah.
Bone Shroud, where I'm like, no, and like what you said too about having him feel so trustworthy
Yeah.
and just finding out who he's been the whole time and what he's been doing, really took me by surprise. So any thoughts you can give me or things you can share on those
So
parts?
I am a very black and white person myself, so it was very hard for me. But because I acknowledge that, I was able to really intentionally decide how to write it, right. So CERN's the best example of that. You know, he's a liar, and what does he say that's true? It's a very good question, and that's you have to decide as you're reading it is what is he saying is true and false. But I had to make sure that I wasn't putting up any straw man, and that was my primary goal. If anybody's a straw man, it's Dane. But but CERN, I really tried to nail home that what he's saying is not wrong. It's just not right. And there's more to that than you'll know, especially in book 3. You'll start to see some more of that, of just more people saying things. You're like, this is just so wrong. This is just so wrong. And then someone will say, but you know, they're right, right? You're like, wait, no, but they're wrong. It says, no, they are wrong, but what they're saying is correct. It doesn't mean it's right. So that's like the whole argument that he and Ophidia bring up, is that Ophidia and him don't believe in right and wrong. They don't believe in good and evil. They believe in right and wrong. And that's a whole argument, debate you can get into of what is war, right? When is war justified? When is war right? Whether it's good, is it ever good? That's a good question. And so putting up those Iron Man arguments or Steel Man arguments instead of straw men is very important to me, because I did want people to relate to it and not just feel like I'm just hand holding them through my philosophical my thoughts, because that's not true. So yeah, it's difficult, and it's not just a matter of overlaying the plot I'm trying to tell, but yeah, how do you justify Dane? And you don't, but you make him believable by giving him qualities that are worthwhile, and people hate me for it, and I'm happy about that.
I'm all here for it too, because it's like, and that's why with Dane too, something I was trying to say earlier. I love that, like, he's just this terrible guy, and you see though that, like, although he's going about it the wrong way, and like he just seems like he would be insufferable to be around, he's overzealous with his beliefs, but they're not coming from like, I specifically want to hurt other people. It's, I believe that I am absolutely right and that my belief is stronger, and so that you should be doing this.
Yeah.
But him kind of getting his comeuppance in just a very like calm way, like, is go, and Jimin's like, well, then you did this, and then they're like, okay, we're gonna impose this punishment. What else did he do? And it's just like, it was so satisfying, and yet also it's just seeing that too, because that could have easily gone the super tropey route where he is the ultimate bad guy, or like some big thing, or like nobody believes Jinnid, and like you don't get that. You get a very reasonable reactions to it, which tailors perfectly into the scene. One of just my favorite things, and it's such a small thing, but one of my favorite things about Bone Shroud, and I talked to you a little bit about this, is Dorian, and just how unflappable he is. And like, I remember, this isn't gonna be like the exact words, but I sent you something. I'm like, it's Dorian, like, can you remove your hood? Oh yes, just as I thought. You're a non-corporeal being. And I'm just like, it was, his reaction was so perfect, and it's just because it's the way he is, and it's his character, and it would be so easy to have like
It's a
the
bit Dumbledore.
yeah,
Yeah.
and to have the big responses, but he's just so nonchalant about everything, because that's him. And I love the choice of him to talk a little bit about that too. And it just like it, when then he does have a strong reaction to something, it makes it that much more meaningful too.
Yeah, exactly. And because he's lived a long life, right? He's 90. Did I say he's 96? I think he's 96 years old. And he was in the Protectorate Wars. And the Protectorate Wars were a metaphysical war, right? They were Vul showing up, and I make a small reference that the Brazen Man literally showed up, and there's zombies, or are they zombies? who guess we'll find out later. And so there's magic that is outside of the miracles of Grisone. So that's why nothing phases him. He's seen it all, but different. And so he's seen it all. And he will probably be very surprised when I tell the story of the Protectorate Wars and he's 26 years old, 27. And it's the first time he's ever seen it. But yeah. So that's where he's coming from. And that's why he's just so unflappable, because why bother? I mean, he's not lazy, but that's kind of his attitude, is why bother? Why would I punish him? He'll learn. He'll figure it out. He didn't actually hurt anybody. Yeah, Dane is insufferable, but he's learning too. And I kind of imply it. I think it's in Bone Shroud is Jurgon. Jurgon implies that he knows Dane's story, and you need to give the guy a break because you have no idea what he went through in as a young man. But I can't say anything because I heard it while I was attending the Prima Pater, and that's who he told it to. And so, because Jurgon's an honorable guy who's not going to go around and just gossip. So just those, it doesn't justify Dane, but it justifies his existence in the plot, that he's a normal person, because we've all known a Dane. We've all known Danes, and they all have different origin stories on how they became that way, and it isn't always the same. But knowing that he does have an origin story is what makes him worse, but also better. So, yeah.
Not quite sympathetic, but you're like, okay,
No.
I mean, there's at least a reason.
Like Kyle Haven.
I say we chatted about that too. Yeah. Well, it's like, and it's a similar way. Like, I don't like Kyle at all. He's a terrible guy, but I liked that there were some things where it's like he's being terrible about the way he's doing this, and the reasonings he has are terrible. But like, he's not wrong about everything either.
Yeah.
Some of it.
You know, it's very much, you could see Brashen becoming Kyle.
Yeah.
If circumstances didn't align the way they did, Kyle fought to be a member of that family, and once he got there, he was never going to let go. And Brashen, if you gave Brashen another 10 years, he could be Kyle if he went down that road. So, yeah,
I could definitely see it. And then let's see, I'm keeping an eye on here, but so I wanted to talk about a little bit about the Black Sentinel structure too. And I know there's a lot of that is fairly non-spoiler, and so I debated bringing it up earlier, but very specifically where we find out more about the in-world creation of the Black Sentinels in Bone Shroud pretty late on, which were some big spoilers, which is why I waited. And so kind of like looking at how you developed the Black Sentinels, and then also kind of their development in the world and how that came to be, knowing why they were originally created as well.
So they actually came from who Rawlia used to be when she was Rawl, and he was this raised by elves, awesome fighter, and there was this organization called the Scythemen, and they had all of these weapons, and you'd earn more weapons as you advanced. So that was a huge holdover from that of, okay, well, Rawlia is not a Scytheman anymore. We're going to make up this new organization. We'll do mercenaries, but I want to keep this idea of new tools for new status symbols inside the organization. And so it kind of came from that. But it's follow a lot of that same trope of you get the worst weapon first, which, I mean, you'd think about it if you were designing it in a modern setting, that's not what you do. You should be giving someone the best weapon, and as they get better, maybe give someone the katana first, and then later they learn the sai, because the sai or a jitte is a sign of skill or authority. Not that it's something you would pull, because the first thing you should pull is your sword. So the Sentinels go backwards, right? It's a club. What does that mean? Well, at least they're not going to kill anybody. Okay, well, that justifies it, but also it's not a good defense weapon. Give them an axe once they're responsible enough, and now they have a sidearm that's more dangerous. And then you get up to like crossbow, which is not a great weapon, right? Because you only get one shot until you reload it, but it's expensive and it's a status symbol. So it just kind of flowed from that. They went through a bunch of name changes. At one point, long before I met Chiago. Sorry, buddy. They were called the Black. I had them Black Sentinels, and then I read Powder Mage, which has Black Sentinels in it. So I changed them to the Black Griffins. And then before I published, I said, you know what? We're going back to Sentinels. Griffins is too confusing. So they went back to being the Sentinels. So they evolved over time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And any tidbits about the in-world creation of them by CERN and kind of how that all came to be? And if you can't, that's fine too. Which I know a lot of these questions.
It's not a huge spoiler for me to reveal it, but CERN is not just the high commander of the Sentinels. He actually formed them from almost whole cloth himself. So he talks about how he adopted and became part of it, but he actually adopted several other mercenary charters and basically built it all up from nothing. So he makes it look like it's been around for forever, but it's only because he adopted older charters to form a singular group in a very short time. Because he's only, do the math here, he might be 50. He's probably young. He's probably barely 50. CERN is barely 50. So he's done it all in less than 20 years.
Gotcha. I was going to say, because from end of Bone Shred, it seemed like he was pretty much the founder and everything too. Yeah. And so, finding, just in case there's anybody sticking around, I've been talking spoilers, not going to the really big spoilers, just in case with it. But, man. See, now I really want to read book 3 right now. I don't have to wait. That's why I'm excited, at least that we.
You don't have to wait too long. It's done, and I've got it sitting in a Google Drive folder for my editor to start working on it. So it's going to be it'll be soon. It might even be sooner than I planned.
Soon too. I know, because we were just talking about.
So I can tell you that Fourscored, I'm actually going to go ahead and just release it probably beginning of March. So you get that right away. And we're going to talk with we're going to get the editing done here on book 3 and then edited latest August. I would love to get it sooner. So,
Fourscored coming out will be a good birthday present for March. So yes. I'm good with that. And then I'll definitely look forward to book 3 coming as well. So I'm just so excited. But I feel like this is probably a good point where we could kind of wrap up. I think I scared off most of our viewers when we moved on to spoilers, but I couldn't resist having some spoiler questions here. But it has just been fantastic chatting with you and having you. Figure I'll let you rest your voice a little bit too before we go into another big live show as well. So, but absolutely appreciate you joining, and I cannot wait to read more of your stuff. So
cool. And thank you all for coming. I really look forward to talking to you all. And of course, you can always ask me questions. And if I can't tell you, then I'll Raffo.
I'm doing pretty good. I didn't get any Raffos, so I try not to dig in too deep with stuff like that too. You'll probably get, especially as I continue, I'll probably start bombarding you with little things here and there too. So.
Anytime.
All right. Well, thanks everybody who joined or anybody coming on replay. We actually just jumped a viewer, so that's pretty bad timing. But thanks everybody for joining here. We've just wrapped up, but it has been a blast. So hope you enjoyed whether watching live or on replay. And we'll have to definitely see anything having you back for something in the future, because that would be great. So
look forward to it.
Bye everybody.
Bye.